What's up everyone, Thomas here, aka Restroom's Trainer, and welcome back to another one of my videos. So I'm sure most of us at some point have been surprised by the sizes of some Pokémon, being either bigger or smaller than expected. And last year, I made a video covering a bunch of Pokémon whose size I would change. Though that only covered Pokémon from Kanto, so it did only make sense to follow it up by looking at some of the Pokémon from Johto. However, I could only list 3 Pokémon whose size I would change. So instead of doing just Johto, I'm also going to do Hoenn as well. You might obviously recommend going and watching my first video to get a basic idea of how I'll be going about this. Although I do want to quickly cover a couple things brought up in the comments of that video. In regards to the height chart I used, I'll be adding meters to it to make it easier to understand for those who can't understand feet and inches. The second thing I want to cover was basically the idea that a lot of Pokémon are sort of meant to be pets, and thus it would make sense for them to be small, especially when considering that a majority of trainers in the universe are usually quite young. Now I can definitely see the logic in this argument, and I do think it was somewhat applied in the earlier games, though I also think that it's something they've been moving away from as the series goes on. So for that reason, plus for the sake of consistency, and partial laziness, I'm not going to change how I view the sizes of these Pokémon. Also, remember that this video is entirely my opinion, and you're free to disagree with it. Lastly, before we begin, don't forget to like and subscribe, it really helps this channel out, as I'm hoping to reach 1,000 subscribers by the end of the year. But with all that out of the way, let's get started. The first Pokémon I want to cover is fittingly the first Pokémon in the Johto Pokédex, Chikorita, who is 2 foot 11 or 0.9 meters. That seems quite big for a starter Pokémon, especially when compared to the 1 foot 8 Cyndaquil and the 2 foot Totodile. Now yes, the Chikorita line is based on sauropods, so it would make sense for them to be big, but this is still just the first stage Pokémon, so I feel like dropping it down to 2 foot would make a bit more sense. The next Pokémon is Feraligatr, who is a whopping 7 foot 7 or 2.3 meters tall, which is quite large, especially for a starter Pokémon. In fact, it significantly dwarfs the other 2 Johto starters, with Typhlosion at 5 foot 7 and Meganium at 5 foot 11. So I'm going to knock off a foot and bring him down to 6 foot 7. Still quite big, and still noticeably bigger than the other 2, but at least the size difference isn't as big as before. And the final Johto Pokémon I want to cover is Blossom. Now if we quickly look at the heights for the rest of the Oddish line, you'll see that Oddish is 1 foot 8, Gloom is 2 foot 7, and Vileplume is 3 foot 11. Now, how tall do you think Blossom is? 1 foot 4. That's right, Blossom is even shorter than Oddish. It genuinely shocked me just how tiny Blossom is. So I don't think I need to explain why I'm going to make her bigger. I ultimately decided that 3 foot seemed somewhat appropriate. And now onto the Hoenn Pokémon, starting with all 3 middle stage starters, since all 3 basically have the same problem. For some context, both Grovyle and Combusken are 2 foot 11, and Marshtomp is 2 foot 4. Now my problem with these 3 is that I think they're a bit too small, or more accurately, too small when compared to their final evolutions. Since Sceptile is 5 foot 7, Blaziken is a whopping 6 foot 3, and Swampert is 4 foot 11. The jump in size is quite large, with both Combusken and Marshtomp more than doubling in size. So to lessen the size difference, I'm making both Grovyle and Combusken 3 foot 11, and Marshtomp 3 foot 7. Next is Lombre. He stands at a surprising 3 foot 11, which is certainly bigger than I thought it would be. In fact, it's only a foot shorter than the 4 foot 11 Ludicolo, while towering over the 1 foot 8 Lotad. This is kind of a reverse of the last 3, where I think the middle stage is a bit too big. so I'm going to shrink him down to 3'3" instead. Next up is Roselia, yet another middle stage, and you can probably see where this is going. Roselia is only a foot tall, which is way smaller than I thought she'd be, so I'm going to double it to 2 foot, bring her much closer in height to Roserade, though I'll cover Roserade in the next part. The next Pokemon I want to cover is Spinder, and I'll keep this one short. Spinder is 3'7", which is a bit bigger than I usually imagine it to be, so I'm making it 2'7" instead. And finally, we have the Reggie trio, Regirock, Regice, and Registeel. All three are probably shorter than you'd expect. Regirock is 5'7", Regice is 5'11", and Registeel is 6'3". Now while it's not tiny, I feel like these giants should be, well, bigger. So I'm making Regirock 9 foot tall, and both Regice and Registeel 8'7". Still not overly massive, but definitely a bit more fitting. And with that, we've gone through every Pokemon from both Johto and Hoenn whose size I'd change. What do you guys think? What are some Pokemon from these regions that you'd change the size of? Be sure to let me know down in the comments. But that's going to do it from me here. Don't forget to like and subscribe, it would really help this channel out. Have a great day everyone, and I'll see you in the next video. See ya!